Laura, you're going to lead us
Yes.
in on this.
Yes.
So I am not personally someone who has had children, but I know Laura, you have children that are in school, and same with Richard. Is
I
that
have
right?
children that are in homeschool, and then I do have stepchildren that are in public school. But
Yeah.
this next article was particularly interesting to me, and I did ask to be the one to introduce it. Um, so it's from Popular Information, and it's titled "The Right Wing Operatives Orchestrating the Attack on America's School Boards." So this is particularly interesting to me because even in our area, and not them specifically, but irate parents have been harassing parents who support things like masks in school and vaccinations and stuff like that. So parents have been actually like run off the school grounds and like they'll be chasing their cars as they're driving off and they've interrupted school board meetings even here locally. So when I saw this article, I was like, "Oh yeah, no, this is very widespread and this is a problem." So this article is about this group, and it does go into other groups as well, and it kind of highlights that this is an ongoing problem with people being given death threats, with school board meetings being interrupted, people being shouted at and threatened, and like knocking on the windows during the meetings. But this particular group is nasty. And what they're doing is, they're trying to push, sort of a right-wing agenda into the public school system. And what's interesting about this is that basically their rhetoric. So they say that their job is to reclaim the schools from sort of extremism and what they call a woke curricula. Whatever that means, I think it'll be fun to get into that. Um, but they say that they are a national and they're called I should go back to what they're called. PDE is the Parents Defending Education. Um, and their reported sort of slogan is that they're a national grassroots organization working to reclaim our schools from activists imposing harmful agendas. I found that kinda interesting because here you have this group that's trying to push a really heavy agenda. Agendas like still having prayers in school and, not teaching about, what is it called? Critical race theory, which isn't, by the way, taught in grade schools, by the way. But, they're 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 really pushing this agenda of what can and can't be in public school, and yet they're saying that their agenda is to stop people from pushing their agendas in public schools. So,
Yeah.
I found that a little bit
Yeah.
hypocritical, but what do you guys think about that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it needs to be pointed out as well that the people, they're not metaphorically attacking people; they're actually going out and threatening
Physically.
physical
Yeah,
violence against people.
yeah.
Yeah, I have unfortunately quite a lot to say. I was actually just moving this week from my old small town in the Bible Belt in the Carolinas. And when I was there
Ooh.
last year, I was a campaign manager for a progressive state congressional campaign, and I got to know a lot of the candidates, including our school board candidates. Something that's important to note is that there is an attack on our school boards that is happening across the country from irate parents who have been basically brainwashed into believing that any sort of education that doesn't center God, guns, and country is, this Marxist liberal demon, whatever.
Yeah.
So the attack is coming both from parents who are threatening members of school boards and just parents who oppose their beliefs. But then the attack is also happening in the election from candidates who are being pushed in to these offices and sort of galvanizing this base to say, we're
Mhm.
we're here on the inside. Back in my hometown, we had three candidates who have no real education, experience to speak of, who unseated these experts who had been there for years, or had worked in, education in colleges, and immediately, of course, they banned critical race theory. One of them is even pushing to center their sex ed curriculum around the dangers of being a single parent. And they've said a lot of really inflammatory things about children who are born out of wedlock. They've said some really racist things, transphobic things, and it's incredible, like just absolutely jaw-dropping to see the entire clown show that is every school board meeting in this small town. A few weeks ago, the meeting had to be canceled because there was a death threat made towards one of their colleagues. And these guys completely downplayed it. They gaslit everybody, said that there wasn't a credible threat, which we later found out was untrue. I've had personal altercations and arguments with these guys. It's terrifying to see what is happening, not just in my county, but all around the country. This is not a single phenomenon. It's terrifying. What do you guys have to say about that?
Well, and they even
Yeah.
put on their own website, like they put a map up. They call it the Indoctrination map, and we have links to it in the original article. But it has locations of schools all over the place that they feel aren't teaching the correct curriculum, or that they feel are needing to be targeted with activism. And it's really kind of scary to think about that. They're like, "Hey, people, go to these schools. Hey, people, cause a fuss here." It's a little bit terrifying, and I don't know, I kind of thought of this a little bit as homegrown terrorism within our public school system, because you may not have, necessarily bombs going off, or gun violence, but what you do have is you are literally terrorizing the people that are part of these boards to the point where they can't do their jobs anymore. And parents can't go to school board meetings and stick up for their own personal views because they're going to be attacked by other parents. And so if that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. And it's kind of frightening that this is happening even at our local public school systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad. Sorry, Malty, go on.
I was going to talk a little bit about this parents defending education, which is trying to pass themselves off as a grassroots organization, where it's a little bit different than that. The people that are leading this have worked very in close proximity to, or been funded by, the Koch brothers. In fact, the president, Nicole Nelly, was a advisor to the Koch Foundation for a while, and now she's the president of this.
Mhm.
What they're trying to do, I find, is stop or roll back any progress that has been happening over the past few years towards equality and increasing the education of our children, the safety and welfare of our teachers. And when I see on their website that they would maintain this indoctrination map, which what that is it's a place where people can post. I saw this where I saw someone committing anti-racism. This is a little, or that they also are asking if you see someone that is offering teacher support through affinity groups, or if you see people that are acknowledging inequality, you can let us know, and we'll put these pins in this map. So these are things that we need to everyone be aware of, that these problems are going on. Things like anti-racism. Yeah, but when you get people like Tucker Carlson and Fox News, then promoting this stuff, it can kind of get some traction, and that's very, very scary.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the how well funded and how well backed it is, which I didn't mention when I first introduced it, and I'm glad you did, because there was also another, they're both of these groups are really well funded, but there was another one they talked about in the article called "No Left Turn in Education," and I'm just going to read it here. What the article says about it. It says that they were a relatively small unit until Fishbein appeared on Tucker Carlson Tonight, which you were just talking about, right? After which the group's Facebook page shot up from fewer than 200 followers to over 30,000 overnight, right? So we're talking about some pretty well-connected, well-funded people who are able to just grow their numbers in this absolutely tremendous way. It's kind of frightening. and their rhetoric sounds really, really good. Like, oh, we don't want divisiveness in our schools. We don't want to teach hate. They're teaching a political agenda. It all sounds like something that if I didn't know what they were talking about, I could get behind,
Mhm.
right? If I didn't research it and know what their rhetoric was really about, I would be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. We shouldn't have like radicalized agendas being taught in public schools, right? But they're talking about things like pro LGBT messages and good sexual health education, and um, I just think it's I don't even know what to say about it other than like
Mhm.
it's a little bit I know you are, but what am I ish? Like they're the ones that are so radical telling us that this is
Yeah.
how we need to teach our children. And yet their messaging is so well meaning sounding, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, that is one thing that the right does so well, which is messaging. I mean, look at the terrorist insurrection on January 6th. It was people praying and waving flags, and they sort of co-opted patriotism itself as sort of like this monkey or for I'm going to stop every progress and I'm going to, do everything in my power to make sure that I maintain the power to oppress other people. But you're
Mhm.
so right that they are so good at messaging. And it's not by accident. I mean, it's sort of what we're touching on here. This is so well funded. The other thing that the right is so good at is just astroturfing. They are experts at sort of utilizing social media to astroturf these movements. Which I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it
Not at
basically
all.
means, yeah. So we talk about grassroots
Mhm.
campaigns. Astroturfing is where you know basically from the top down you make it seem as if this is a grassroots campaign, but it is completely artificial. It is funded by the Koch brothers or by these major figureheads behind the scenes. They are so good at that, and it's so sad to see because in a lot of the towns that I've been to campaigning and sort of talking to these parents and these individuals is that they believe wholeheartedly that they are on the right side. They think that they are good American Christians. They truly are terrified that our country is under attack, that children are being taught this evil Marxism and are being taught to be gay and
I was
all
about
of
to say
these
that
ridiculous
homosexuality
things.
can be taught in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. They're so afraid of representation. But I feel for a lot of these parents because they are genuinely terrified, and Fox News, OAN,
Mhm.
all of these organizations are so good at inciting that fear.
Oh, and
It's
stirring it up.
Yeah,
Yeah. I know I have a very close
absolutely.
family member with whom I've cut off ties who spouts this rhetoric, and I even put that in my show notes that like this really scared me because um I have family members who believe this kind of stuff and who are so closely aligned with this message, and to try and talk to them or talk them out of it or reason with them is very, very, very difficult. And like what
Mhm,
I was talking about with the hey, the rhetoric sounds really good even to me if I didn't know any better. One of the things they said about accepting LGBTQ children was that it represents the dismantling of the family unit, right? Which to me is abhorrent. Like the fact that you can even say that about any child and their sexual or gender preferences or how they feel or how they identify. To me, it's absolutely ridiculous. But when someone else hears dismantling of the family unit, that causes real fear. That causes like panic that we are going to come apart as a social like weaving, right? And so yeah, I'm right there with you. Like I it's a mix of pity for these people, but then also just I'm infuriated by it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes I'm so glad that I don't live in America. And this is one of those times. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. We have our fair share of like parents who get want to protest against schools here. We've had a few cases of like Muslim parents going down because they've not been happy with but that's reactionary. And that's
Mhm.
completely different to what's happening here because this is something that's like been underscored throughout the American education system as
Mhm.
something that's bad, and it's a movement. This isn't a reaction to something, it's a movement dressed up as a reaction to something. And that's
Right.
what's dangerous about it.
Yeah, I was gonna correct you until you said that, dressed up as, because that is how they speak. No, we are reacting. Like you are trying to change our school systems. You are trying to indoctrinate our children. You are trying to sneak your agenda of intolerance and hate into the school system. Although I'm not sure how understanding racism and being compassionate towards LGBTQ people can possibly be hate and and
Hmm.
and dismantling. But yeah, you're right. It is dressed up as a reaction, but it's very proactive.
When I first saw this indoctrination map, before I got an understanding of what it was, and I saw the little pins as places where I thought that they were actually going and doing action, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at the East Coast. But no, no, this is where they're seeing things like I say, positive. This is places where they're saying things going awry or going to the left. So, I mean,
Mhm.
that actually, when I look at this map and now I see all these pins, it does make me a little more happy, especially all the ones in Texas and
That's
all
a good
down
way
the
of looking at
East
it. Yeah.
Coast. So it is good to see that there's some forward movement
Hmm.
in the education front.
You just really quickly. It's funny because you
Oh,
mentioned Texas. I didn't even think about this before, but the entire school curriculum and what gets published in textbooks, a lot of that is centered around what Texas wants because they are such a huge market and some of these publishers are based there. And the irony of these guys coming and saying that this leftist agenda is what we're reacting to. Um, we actually have a lot of really right-wing bias in the way that we currently teach
Teach
things like
schools.
history and science. Like,
Right.
you've already won. You have already won. You have already sort of diminished the science and history that is in the books that exist today. Why are they complaining even more? It's so terrifying, and I do pity them to see that they've invented this sort of boogeyman. And yet, if they just actually focused on what has happened, like, unfortunately, they've already won.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
and
it.
the point
Oh, go
you
ahead,
make
Richard.
about sorry, the point you make about the publishers being based in Texas, I think that's we've touched several times in the past on the non-profits about the school boards being like petitioned to try and get things like creationism taught um, as legitimate scientific theories when they're just not. And
hmm.
that in part is because if they get in Texas, that's where the publishers are, and then it can be spread throughout the US. And
And it becomes more mainstream.
it's concerted effort, and there's real reasoning behind it, but they don't seem to understand the this isn't just they're not just threatening uh, the school board members physically. They're not just threatening them with violence. What they're actually doing is putting their own children at risk to bad ideas and bad thinking. And that's one of the most dangerous things about this whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not to go back to the anti-mask thing, but just that alone, like when if you're not wanting your child to wear a mask, fine, don't be happy about it. Don't let your child wear a mask or whatever. But to cause that kind of violence and disruption in the schools and to demand that there not be a mask policy at all whatsoever, if you think about it, it's like, look, um, you may or may not agree that masks help, but they don't hurt, right? And so, whether or not you know the science behind it, whether or not you completely agree with it, to just tell your child, like, hey, we're just taking precautions. Maybe this precaution helps, maybe it doesn't, right? But we're just going to take a precaution versus I'm not going to have my child wear a mask, right? Like, you bring up a really good point. Like, the different rhetoric that they're spouting and the things that they're actually fighting against really do bring harm to their like actual harm to their children. Not just with the mask thing, but think about like LGBT issues and what they're saying. Like, what if one of their children falls into that category? Like, they're not just hurting another parent's child, which is bad enough, but they could potentially be hurting their own child.
Hmm. Genevieve, any
Yeah,
last word?
you know, I think Laura, you bring up such a good point, and the sad thing is because I know a lot of these anti-mask and anti-vax parents,
Mhm.
they in their mind they would never do anything to harm their children. They think that
Right.
they're helping them. They think that they're standing up for what's right, and it's just with how many children have gotten sick, with how many parents are sick, with schools closing, with everything going on. It's just it's so heartbreaking to see parents who genuinely think they're on the right side of history, or who are helping their children, just actively hurting them
Yeah.
so blatantly. I think if they could somehow wake up and see this, I would hope that they would be horrified.